What if I told you that a few animals, once released into the wild, could take over an entire continent and trigger an ecological disaster on a national scale? This is not a science fiction scenario, but a real story that happened in Australia. A story about camels that turned from helpers into true invaders. And before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel. To understand the scale of the drama, we need to go back to the 19th century. Australia, a vast and dry continent, needed to be developed. For building telegraph lines and railways connecting the southern coast to the north, a hardy means of transportation was required. Horses simply could not handle the harsh desert conditions. The solution came from the east. In 1840, the first camel was brought to Australia. Later, for large-scale projects, thousands of these animals arrived along with their handlers, who were collectively called Afghans, even though they came from various parts of Asia. These people and their animals became true pioneers of the continent. Camels, often called ships of the desert, could carry heavy loads across vast distances with almost no water or food. They were the key to conquering Australia's arid deserts and endless hostile lands. But progress is relentless. In the early 20th century, automobiles and trains appeared, making camel transport obsolete. Thousands of camels and their handlers were left without work. The Australians then made a decision that seemed simple at the time. They simply released the camels into the desert. Several thousand animals no longer needed were set free in all directions. They wandered deep into the continent and were quickly forgotten. For the camels, the Australian desert turned out to be a true paradise. There were no natural predators, like tigers or wolves that hunted them in Asia. Instead, there were plenty of thorny bushes and salt flats, the perfect food for these unpretentious creatures. The original population not only survived, but began to grow rapidly. From just a few animals, their numbers turned into tens of thousands. It was the beginning of a biological explosion, whose scale no one could have predicted. Camels are perfectly adapted to drought. They can drink up to 200 litres of water at once, and then go without it for weeks. Their bodies can withstand dehydration, up to 40% of their body weight, something that would be fatal for any other mammal. Their population grew geometrically: 50,000, 100,000, 300,000. By the early 2000s, even by the most modest estimates, more than 1 million wild camels roamed the Australian deserts, the largest population in the world. And that's when the problems began. Massive herds of camels became a serious threat to the continent's fragile ecosystem. They trampled vegetation and competed for food with native species such as kangaroos and wallabies. Their greatest damage came to water sources. During droughts, herds of hundreds attacked the few available waterholes, draining them completely and contaminating what remained. For many native animals, it meant certain death. But the camels did not stop at the wilderness. In search of water, they began invading farms and remote settlements. They knocked down fences stretching for miles, broke pipes and pumps, and caused massive destruction for farmers. It became absurd. Desperate animals broke into homes trying to reach toilet water or tore air conditioners off walls to lick off condensate. From helpers, they had turned into outright pests. But the hardest blow fell on the farmers. Hungry camel hordes emerged from the desert, destroying crops and trampling entire fields. For farms already suffering from drought, this meant disaster, ruin, and bankruptcy. Camels eat up to 80% of local plant species, leaving no chance for fragile flora to recover. This leads to soil degradation, turning vast areas into lifeless deserts, which only worsens the wildfire problem. A little known fact: unlike cows and sheep with their hard hooves, camels have soft, calloused pads on their feet. Their steps cause much less damage to the delicate top layer of desert soil. But that's a small comfort. Camels made up for it with their overwhelming numbers. The Australian government recognised the scale of the problem. The camel was officially declared pest number 1. A full-scale war was declared against it. In 2009, a population control project was launched. The main method was aerial culling. Helicopters carrying sharpshooters patrolled the desert and shot camels from the air. It was a brutal but, in the government's view, the only effective way to reduce their numbers in hard-to-reach areas. This program sparked outrage among animal rights activists around the world. Footage of the camel culls spread across all news channels. Society was divided over whether it was acceptable to solve a human-made problem in such a cruel way. Of course, there were attempts to find commercial uses for this biological bomb. Entrepreneurs tried to turn the pest into a valuable resource. There was talk of camel meat and even the export of live animals. The idea of using the meat sounded promising. It is lean and in demand in the Middle East. But logistics in the Australian desert are a nightmare. Catching, transporting, and processing hundreds of thousands of wild animals proved nearly impossible. Exporting live camels for racing in Arab countries became more of an amusing anecdote than a solution. Yes, a few animals were sold for large sums, but that was just a drop in the ocean compared to the million-strong army that had taken over the continent. All these commercial ventures remained narrowly focused and had almost no impact on the overall numbers. The problem was simply too large. Human ingenuity was powerless against the very force of nature it had unleashed. So the main method remained the same: brutal and bloody aerial culling. Millions of dollars were spent to keep the population under control. But this was not a victory, only a desperate attempt to hold the line in a lost war. Interestingly, this invasion also has a cultural aspect. For some indigenous communities, camels have become sacred animals from biblical stories. This creates an inner conflict, as the animals are destroying their lands, yet it feels wrong to raise a hand against a symbol of faith. This story is a vivid example of how humanity, believing itself the master of nature, suffered a crushing defeat. Just a few camels released into the wild turned into an uncontrollable force that showed mankind its true place in the world. In this battle, man did not win. He merely learned to pay dearly for his past mistakes, fighting a never-ending and exhausting war against the consequences of his own short-sightedness. What do you think about this? Share your thoughts in the comments.